Hey there. Tonight we're stepping into the soft-scented shadows of the past, into the private world of a queen whose face was more than just her own. It was England's. This isn't a tale of crowns and conquest, not quite. It's something more delicate, more perfumed. We're peeling back the powder and roses to gently uncover what beauty really meant for Queen Elizabeth I, and what it cost her to maintain it. If gentle stories like this help you unwind where history unfolds in hushed tones and soft candlelight, you're more than welcome to subscribe or follow along, only if it feels right for you. Now take a deep breath and let's begin. You wake up in a room that isn't yours. The air is heavy with lavender rose oil and beeswax. A single candle flickers on the far wall, its glow bouncing gently off the folds of crimson velvet. The floor is silent beneath your feet, polished, yes, but not by water. And as your eyes adjust, you notice something peculiar. There are no mirrors in this room, not a single one. Just soft fabrics, perfumed gloves, laid in perfect pairs, and a faint sweetness in the air that doesn't come from flowers. You're not just anywhere. You're in the private world of Queen Elizabeth I. Elizabeth's world wasn't built on cleanliness as we know it. It was built on presentation. While we might imagine royalty as spotless and pristine, the reality was far murkier, especially in a time when water itself was considered a threat. Historians often describe the Elizabethan era as visually stunning but hygienically jarring, a time when sweet smells replaced soap and layers of fabric stood in for showers. The Queen's rooms were filled with fragrant objects, embroidered handkerchiefs soaked in rose water, perfumed gloves lined with herbs, and small spherical pomanders hanging from her girdle filled with cloves and myrrh. These were not mere luxuries, they were protective talismans. At a time when bad air was believed to carry illness, fragrance wasn't just about elegance. It was strategy. And yet it wasn't always enough. The castles and palaces she inhabited from Richmond to Whitehall were vast but unplumbed. Water had to be hauled in by servants. Waste had to be carried out in the dead of night. There were no sinks, no flushing toilets, no modern comforts. So instead of fighting the odors, the Queen conquered them layer by scented layer. One of the most surprising facts, even for those familiar with Elizabeth, is that she often forbade mirrors in her personal spaces, whether for spiritual reasons or practical ones. The Queen, particularly in her later years, simply didn't want to see what age or illness might be doing to the image she worked so hard to preserve. It's not that she was vain in the shallow sense. Rather, her entire rule hinged on the idea of untouchable magnificence. If her body betrayed her through illness odor or time, her authority could begin to crack. Historians still debate whether Elizabeth fully understood the toll her cosmetic practices were taking on her health. But what's less in question is how tightly she controlled everything seen and unseen around her. Her bedroom wasn't just a place of rest. It was a stage. One she curated with the precision of a monarch who knew her survival might depend on never appearing mortal. In this stage-like world, every object had a role. The gloves weren't just protection. They were status symbols. The perfumed linens weren't just pleasant. They were tools for illusion. The absence of mirrors wasn't neglect, it was defense. Even the candles with their steady flicker cast flattering shadows rather than harsh truths. Every detail in her chamber whispered one message: you are not seeing a woman, you are seeing the crown. One curious detail that often slips through the history books is the Queen's relationship with gloves. She owned hundreds of pairs, each finely crafted and infused with oils and powders. These gloves were not merely worn, they were gifted. To receive a pair of the Queen's gloves was to be trusted with her scent, her essence. In a way, it was an intimate exchange, though carefully orchestrated. Another lesser-known tidbit: some of her handkerchiefs were embroidered not just with floral designs, but with tiny coded messages. These weren't scandalous secrets. but poetic references or phrases chosen with care. In a time where words held power, and women's voices were limited, embroidery became its own quiet form of influence. Of course, none of this would have been possible without the tireless labor of her attendants. Every day, women carefully layered the queen's clothing, dabbed her skin with floral waters, and arranged the fabrics that would cover her from neck to toe. They knew where to apply balm, how to sprinkle clove powder into gloves, and which rose oil smelled strongest after an evening in the privy. These women weren't just servants. They were scent engineers, visual illusionists, and the quiet guardians of the royal image. And still, under all the fragrance and fabric, there was a body, a real, aging body. A woman who had suffered smallpox in her youth, leaving faint scars she hid for decades. A woman who likely experienced chronic skin conditions from the very cosmetics meant to beautify her. And a woman who, like many of her time, feared water more than almost anything. You pause by a linen chest near the foot of her bed, tracing the edges of the folded garments stacked inside. Some of these would have been changed 3 or 4 times a day, not out of luxury, but as part of the belief that clean linen drew impurities from the skin. This was considered dry cleaning in its most literal form, bathing in water. That was dangerous. It could disrupt the humors, let bad air into the pores, invite illness. And so Queen Elizabeth's scent became her safeguard. Her elegance became her armor, and her chamber, silent, warm, and perfectly arranged, became a place where history's most iconic woman could disappear into ritual. You sit now imagining the weight of all those expectations, the need to glow, to radiate grace and power, even as one's body whispered otherwise. And as the candle flickers lower, you realize the truth. This wasn't just beauty. It was resistance. It was survival. So tonight we begin here in the scented silence of a woman's carefully built world. And as we journey through the rituals that shaped her, we'll also travel beyond to other lands and other women who in their own ways battled the same invisible pressures. But for now, rest here a moment longer. Among the gloves, the herbs, the rosewater folded into every corner. This is where the mask begins. The morning begins not with sunlight, but with scent. You're still in her chamber where the curtains are drawn, just enough to let in the filtered glow of a gray English sky. But the light doesn't matter here. What matters is the mirror you'll never see, and the face that will never meet your eyes, not as it truly is anyway. Because the woman who will emerge today, as she does every day, will not be Elizabeth Tudor. She will be the Virgin Queen, flawless, glowing, untouchable, and to become that she needs her face, but not the one she was born with. You sit silently near the painted dressing table as the ritual begins. Her attendants know every step. First, the washcloth dampened not with plain water, but with rose-infused vinegar gently pressed against skin that hasn't felt open air in years. Then the first layer of powder. Not blush or bronzer, no, this is Venetian ceruse, a fine white paste made of white lead and vinegar. Toxic, corrosive, and cherished. Elizabeth wore it for decades long after its damage began to show. The compound softened the skin's appearance under candlelight, gave her that ghostly glow that symbolized noble blood, untouched by sunlight. But in truth, the paint was a mask in every sense. It covered not only wrinkles and scars, but the pain beneath the exhaustion, the weight of ruling the fading bloom of youth that she could not afford to show. You watch as layer after layer is pressed into her cheeks, her forehead, her jawline. The skin underneath, scarred by smallpox and time, is no longer meant to be seen. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth knew just how much the ceruse was hurting her, but there's little doubt she knew what it was protecting, the illusion of immortality. A queen who could not age was a queen who could not fall. And so the lead continued year after year, eating away at her complexion, even as it reinforced her legend. You notice the movements of her attendants, gentle, rehearsed, almost reverent. The powder is applied with silk cloths and squirrel hair brushes, and the room is kept cool so the sweat won't break through the paint. When it does, because it always does, rosewater is dabbed on again, masking scent, and refixing the mask. No soap, no scrubbing, just concealment and control. Her lips are next painted with a mixture of crushed vermilion and grease, a recipe that includes mercury. It stains the skin a deep regal red, but mercury, like lead, seeps through. It causes tremors, memory lapses, irritability, things that perhaps a court would never dare say aloud, but may have quietly whispered behind closed doors. The signs were there, and yet she continued, because her face wasn't just her own. It was the face of England. By the late 1590s, the mask had grown heavier. Her public appearances became shorter. Portraits were no longer painted from life, but copied from earlier templates. Artists were forbidden to show her aging. What mattered wasn't accuracy, it was consistency. The Queen's image had to remain fixed, serene, untouched by mortality. You lean slightly forward, curious to see how her attendants finish the look. A dusting of rice powder sets the face. A bit of sheen is added at the temples. Tiny patches of silk, sometimes star-shaped, sometimes floral, are pressed over blemishes or cracks in the lid. They're called beauty patches, a charming name for a medical necessity. They cover not only marks and scars, but in some cases, open sores caused by the very paint they hide. And here's a tidbit: you didn't expect these beauty patches, though. Practical became fashionable. Ladies of the court began wearing them even without blemishes, mimicking the Queen. Star shapes, crescent moons, even tiny arrows, each placed strategically to enhance what the mirror could no longer reflect. Some patterns were even used to send subtle social signals, a kind of non-verbal flirtation coated in soot and silk. You notice, too, that her wig remains off. Her real hair, what's left of it, is fine and brittle, pulled gently back from her temples. It's rarely seen. The paint extends to her hairline, blending skin into hair, so that even this boundary is softened. The goal isn't realism, it's sculpture. Once the paint is set, the Queen does not touch her face again, not with hands, not with cloth. To do so would break the illusion, and so she moves through her day carefully, with measured expressions and slow turns, like a performer in an opera, where every movement must preserve the artifice. The irony, of course, is that Elizabeth was deeply intelligent. Her wit, her political acumen, her command of languages, none of it required paint or powder. But in a world where women were judged by appearance before intellect, she chose to master both. Her mind was sharp, but her face flawless, and immobile was her first defense. You begin to wonder what it must have been like to wear such a mask every day. To live inside something so delicate, so dangerous, and yet so necessary. To be admired from afar, but never truly touched. To age beneath a crust of pigment and poison, knowing that even a moment of honesty, one glimpse of the woman beneath, might unravel the myth. And you begin to understand this wasn't simply makeup. It was ritual. It was armor. It was the one thing that stood between a mortal woman and a world that expected her to be divine. Outside, a bell tolls softly. Another day has begun. The Queen will rise soon. The wig will be placed. The dress will be fastened. The gloves, perfumed and prepared, will slide over hands that rarely feel the breeze. But in this quiet moment before the audience begins, you are here, witness to the transformation. A face built not of flesh, but of fierce strategy and silent endurance. You take one last look at the powdery stillness of her cheeks, the gentle shimmer of her lips, and the flickering candlelight that does its best to flatter. The Queen does not smile. She does not blink. She simply is. And the illusion holds. And still the illusion must speak. By the time the Queen steps out to greet her court, the transformation is complete. What stands before them is no longer simply Elizabeth, Tudor daughter of Anne Boleyn. It is Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, whose painted mask gleams with authority, whose crimson lips convey command without needing to raise her voice. But for those who stand close, there are clues. Tiny details betray the burden of that image. Her voice, while sharp, is sometimes muffled by the changes in her mouth. Her words don't always land with clarity, because even the finest paint cannot hide the truth of her teeth. You notice it as soon as she leans slightly forward to address a messenger. Her upper lip moves stiffly. A slight breath escapes sweet, but not in the way perfumes are sweet. It's the sweetness of decay masked under cloves and mint. In the flickering candlelight, her teeth, what remain of them, seem darker than they should. And suddenly you remember what they once said about her, that her smile, once dazzling, had become a shadow of itself. It didn't start that way, of course. Elizabeth had once been praised for her youthful smile when she was still a princess, still untouched by the weight of the crown. But even then she had habits that would later betray her, chief among them sugar. Not in the way most people consumed it, though. Sugar in Tudor England was a luxury imported at great cost, reserved for nobility and measured by the ounce. But for Elizabeth it was a symbol of power. She had candied violets brought to court marzipan sculptures, shaped like castles, dried fruits soaked in syrup, and served in delicate trays after every feast. And here's where it turns sugar wasn't just a treat. It was part of the royal image. To possess it was to show England's wealth. To consume it publicly was to flex political muscle. And so she did. Often, daily, gleefully, but dentistry in the 16th century, that was more hopeful than helpful. Elizabeth reportedly cleaned her teeth with a mixture of honey salt, crushed herbs, and yes, more sugar. One of the most popular pastes of the time was a gritty combination of burnt rosemary and powdered sugar pressed onto a rag and rubbed against the teeth. It gave a feeling of freshness, perhaps, but it also stripped enamel and invited rot. By the 1590s, ambassadors from abroad began to make note of her dental state. Not in official letters, of course, but in private accounts. Her teeth, they observed, had blackened. Some were missing. Her breath, one noted, was of an unpleasant sweetness. Another recorded that he struggled to understand her speech, due to her missing molars. And yet the Queen did not complain. She rarely acknowledged pain. Instead, she carried on refusing all suggestions of extraction or repair. One tale, almost too curious not to be true, involves a courtier offering to have one of his own teeth pulled in her presence, just to prove that the operation was survivable. He sat in the chair, winced, endured the wrenching, and held up the bloody evidence. The Queen watched, thanked him, and still declined, because pain wasn't the issue, exposure was. Historians still debate whether her reluctance was fierce stubbornness or something else. But many agree on one thing for Elizabeth. Any moment of vulnerability, even in a dental chair, could risk unraveling the entire fabric of her myth. A monarch does not flinch. A monarch does not wince. A monarch certainly does not bleed in front of witnesses. And here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Because rather than shy away from her decaying teeth, Elizabeth inadvertently started a trend. You heard that right. Some noblewomen hoping to mimic the Queen's appearance, and therefore her power began to darken their own teeth. Using soot or charcoal rubbed across the enamel, they painted on the look of decay. Not out of aesthetic preference, but out of aspirational alignment. If the Queen's smile bore the marks of age and status, then to look like her was to rise in courtly favor. It's one of the stranger beauty fads of the era, to be sure, like wearing powdered wigs, stained with urine in later centuries, or painting blue veins onto skin to look more aristocratic. But it speaks volumes about how tightly Elizabeth's image controlled the world around her. You sit now at the edge of a long table in the Queen's audience chamber. She listens to reports, offers sharp replies, and gestures with gloved hands. Her lips barely move. Her jaw favors one side. And yet the room remains captivated, not by what she says, but by what she projects. Majesty, control, stillness. And the irony deepens, because even as her smile deteriorated, even as her own teeth betrayed her, she never lost the power to dazzle, not because of how she looked, but because of how carefully she curated what people were allowed to see. One tidbit you might not expect Elizabeth is believed to have owned multiple gold toothpicks, often worn as decorative items. These weren't just functional, they were jewelry. Some were carved with the royal seal, others tucked discreetly into the folds of her clothing. She would sometimes fiddle with one while in thought, or hand it to an attendant with a knowing glance. They became symbols, not just tools, proof that even in discomfort she would remain elegant. You notice, too, that even her food was adjusted to accommodate her condition. Softer dishes, finely mashed meats, stewed fruits, all chosen to require minimal chewing. She often ate alone or behind a fine curtain to conceal the mechanics of her meals, because watching a queen struggle with roast boar was not part of the Gloriana myth, nor would she allow it to be. Still, there were moments quiet behind the scenes, when even her court could not deny what was happening. A missed syllable, a wince hidden behind a fan, the occasional rumor of an infection, a bleeding gum, a night spent in pain. But these moments were rare and carefully managed. If you stood far enough back, the image remained intact. And in that image you begin to see a pattern, a woman fighting not just the expectations of a court, but of a country. A body aging in silence, a smile fading into memory, and yet never once allowing herself to be less than the symbol she had created. It's easy from a modern perspective to focus on the strangeness of it all. The sugar, the soot-stained smiles, the golden toothpicks. But lying beneath all of it is something deeper. A lesson about image, about endurance, about the cost of commanding respect in a world that gave women so little room to show pain. You look again at the queen, still seated, still composed, still utterly in control of what the world sees. And for a moment you wonder if that control, so rigid, so relentless, was the only true protection she had. Not against death or time, but against being forgotten. The candle beside her flickers. A breath escapes her lips. She glances your way almost, but not quite smiling. And the mask, despite everything, still holds. The mask may hold, but water cannot touch it. That's the unspoken rule, the line that must never be crossed. You notice it more clearly now, watching her attendants move through their morning routines. Towels are laid out. Cloths are steamed, rosewater is decanted into silver bowls, but never poured freely. There is no basin to splash one's face in, no steaming bath behind a velvet screen. For a queen who ruled with absolute command, the one thing she refused to let near her body was the very thing we associate with cleansing water. And this is where things begin to feel unfamiliar, even unsettling. Because while you might imagine that someone of Elizabeth's rank would have had every luxury, including marble bathtubs and cascading fountains, the truth is far more constrained. In the 16th century, bathing in water was viewed with caution. It wasn't a regular part of daily hygiene. It was a rare event, often feared, sometimes even avoided for years at a time. Elizabeth herself is said, perhaps apocryphally, to have remarked that she bathed once a month, whether I needed or not. Whether or not she ever truly said those words, the phrase captures the mindset of the time. People didn't bathe to clean themselves. They bathed to prepare for important occasions, or to treat certain illnesses, or because they believed it might draw out toxins. But just as often they avoided it entirely. You glance toward a modest wooden tub nestled behind a screen near her chamber wall. It's rarely used. Bathing, when it does occur, requires coordination. Heated water brought up in buckets by servants. Perfumed oils steeped the night before, towels warmed by the hearth, and attendants at the ready. It's a ritual, a production, not a habit. And so Elizabeth's solution, like much of her personal regime, was to turn to symbolism and substitution. She didn't need to immerse herself in water if she could immerse herself in linen. She changed her undergarments frequently, sometimes multiple times a day. The belief was that linen pressed against the skin would draw out impurities. So to clean oneself, one simply changed layers. No soap, no scrubbing, just the soft, persistent touch of cotton and cambric. Historians still discuss whether this method was truly effective. Some argue that frequent linen changes may have helped reduce odor and sweat buildup. Others believe it was more ritual than reality, but in either case it became Elizabeth's daily practice. And it wasn't just practical, it was graceful. It allowed her to maintain the illusion of purity without ever facing the raw exposure of a true bath. You watch as rose water is poured carefully into a silver dish, warmed slightly and dabbed onto her neck with a folded cloth. Her skin doesn't flinch. She is used to this. The scent is subtle floral, a little sharp and oddly comforting. Her wrists are treated next. Then her temples, not rubbed, dabbed, pressed, gently reaffirmed. The herbal infusions she used were crafted in the palace's still rooms, places where apothecaries and scent specialists blended clove, lavender, orris root, rosemary, and vinegar into tonics that were then aged and decanted for royal use. These concoctions were stored in opaque glass, protected from sunlight, and used sparingly. They were as much tools of state as they were of hygiene. And here's a quirky historical tidbit. Elizabeth was known to carry scented pomanders, small orb-shaped objects filled with aromatic resins. Some were simple spheres tucked into her bodice. Others were ornate pieces of jewelry hung from chains at her waist. When foul odors wafted through the palace, she would lift one delicately to her nose and inhale. This gesture wasn't just about comfort. It was a signal, a message to those around her that her senses and therefore her authority remained intact. You notice how little of her skin is exposed. Even in private, she is rarely uncovered. Her gowns are layered and high-collared. Her sleeves are long even in summer. When she does reveal skin to apply balm to receive perfume, it is with quiet ceremony. Touch is never casual, not even with herself. This fear of exposure, of vulnerability, extended beyond cleanliness. In Elizabeth's world, water symbolized openness, softness, and risk. It was believed to open the pores and let disease in. And for a woman who had watched many die of plague, smallpox, or bad humors, the thought of inviting illness through her very skin must have felt unbearable. So instead, she mastered the art of masking, not just with paint, but with scent, with cloth, with distance. You pause at the edge of the room listening as a servant wrings out another cloth into a basin of chamomile water. The soft rustle of linen, the clink of silver against porcelain, the distant crackle of a fire. This is what cleansing sounds like here. No splashes, no dripping, just the gentle perfumed maintenance of a body that must not be seen as human. And yet under all the ritual there are signs. Her skin, when bare, is pale and delicate, but also marked. Years of lead-based makeup have left it fragile. Fine lines crisscross her cheeks. A small lesion near the jaw is covered quickly with a silk patch. Her arms, rarely uncovered, show the faint red blotches of irritation from perfumes, applied too often too long. But no one comments. No one suggests a bath. The idea of washing everything away, of removing the mask, would be unthinkable. In moments like this, you begin to understand something deeper. Elizabeth wasn't hiding because she was ashamed. She was preserving something. Her power, her dignity, her mystique. All of it was wrapped up in the belief that she was more than flesh. More than just a woman. She was an idea. And ideas don't sweat. They don't wrinkle. They don't need to bathe. Still, the effort it takes is staggering. The time, the layers, the secrecy. You can only imagine what it must have felt like to carry that every day. To know that you could never be fully undone even in your own bedroom, that your skin, your scent, your very breath had to be carefully managed not just for health, but for history. One more interesting note. Elizabeth's linen shifts, her undergarments were often embroidered with small symbols, not publicly visible, but sewn into the seams and cuffs. A rose, a crown, a tiny phoenix. Whether these were signs of ownership or quiet affirmations, no one knows. But they hint at a personal language, a kind of silent spell woven into the fabric closest to her body. A reminder perhaps of who she was beneath the weight of ceremony. And so you watch as the last cloth is folded, the last ribbon tied. The Queen stands ready now for her hair, but she has not been bathed. Not in the way we think of bathing. She has been scented, dabbed, relayered, reinforced. The illusion holds, and as she turns away from the basin as the cloth is taken from her hands, the candlelight catches just a glimmer of something unspoken. Not pride, not shame, just routine. The daily performance of being someone larger than yourself. You step back, giving her space, sensing that even your silent presence is something allowed only by her grace. And in this moment, as the rosewater settles into her skin and the linen rests against her collarbone, you see it again, that strange and sacred balance between strength and fragility, between presence and privacy. And just like that, the ritual moves on. Her hair awaits. Her hair no longer whispers of youth, but it doesn't need to. By now, the Queen has long since traded the softness of natural locks for the permanence of style, the constancy of a crown that doesn't shift with the seasons or the years. You find yourself standing behind her now, just near the ornate dressing mirror, though she never looks into it. Her attendants work in practiced silence, reaching for polished ivory combs and wooden tools, lifting strands that are no longer hers. The natural hair that remains is fine, brittle, and sparse. Years of illness, stress, and exposure to cosmetics, laced with lead and mercury, have taken their toll. Her temples have thinned, her scalp is dry and tender, and the little growth that remains must be handled gently. So, like everything else in her personal presentation, her hair has become a carefully curated illusion. Wigs, elaborate, perfumed, and powdered, are the new reality. You watch as one is brought forth. It is not some towering confection like those that would later define the French court. No, Elizabeth's wigs are crafted with more restraint, but no less intent. This one is a soft auburn shade echoing the vibrancy of her youth. Its curls are set rigid with sugar water, and in some cases stiffened further with egg whites, a sticky process requiring exact timing and a steady hand. The scent of lavender oil clings to the strands, masking the scent of age and adhesive. She owns dozens of wigs, each styled for a particular occasion. Some are coiled tightly in intricate updos. Others are more relaxed with waves that mimic nature more than fashion. A few are even dusted with crushed pearls or gold powder for state appearances, but they all serve the same purpose: continuity. To suggest that time does not touch her, that her image is not a prisoner to biology. Historians confirm that Elizabeth began wearing wigs in earnest after the age of 30. By then, she had survived smallpox, one of the few diseases that could scar the skin and thin the hair in equal measure. The illness left marks on her cheeks that she would cover for the rest of her life, and her once vibrant hair began to fade. Rather than allow nature to take the stage, she created her own version of permanence. You watch the attendants carefully anchor the wig using fine silk ribbons and small golden pins. The Queen does not flinch even when the combs tug against sensitive skin. She has done this 1,000 times. What you see before you is not vanity, it is duty. A monarch must not appear undone, not in person, not in portraits, not even in death. One particularly fascinating detail: when Elizabeth passed away in 1603, she was buried wearing a full red wig styled and set, as if the stage would never close. Even in the grave, her image had to remain intact. And here's a curious tidbit for you. Some of her wigs were reportedly stored on specially carved wooden stands shaped like miniature heads, each labeled not by number, but by name. Some believed these names corresponded to events Progress Council reconciliation, implying that each wig was chosen with narrative in mind, not just fashion. It's not entirely confirmed by all historians, but letters from her wardrobe mistress suggest that her dressing routine often aligned with the tone of the day's courtly affairs. Even her hair told a story. You notice how heavily scented the wigs are. Beneath each layer of curled hair is a base of padding, sometimes linen, sometimes horsehair soaked in floral tinctures and natural oils. This isn't just for Elizabeth's comfort. It's also for those standing close enough to catch a whiff. The perfumes must overpower any other scent of sweat, of old makeup, of breath, gone stale from sleepless nights and endless decisions. The Queen wears gloves as the final touches are applied, not just for etiquette, but to avoid smudging her makeup or dislodging the powdered set of her wig. Her gloves, always perfumed, often stitched with tiny sachets in the lining, are yet another barrier between her and the world. In truth, her entire appearance is a series of strategic boundaries: the powder that shields her skin, the wig that hides her hair, the gloves that separate her from direct contact. Nothing is accidental. Every item touches her with care and with purpose. But beneath all this, you sense something tender. Not weakness, not deception. Just the quiet sorrow of needing to be perfect all the time. The soft ache of never being allowed to shed the costume. And perhaps you wonder that's why the Queen often chose to gift her perfumed gloves to courtiers she favored. It wasn't merely a sign of royal approval. It was a way to share something intimate without crossing the invisible line. A gesture that said, "You may not touch me, but you may carry my scent." You move closer to a side table, where several wigs are arranged beneath a cloth. One is slightly darker, perhaps, meant for colder months. Another bears traces of lavender buds woven into its netting. And there's one that's noticeably older, the curls less defined, the scent fading. It's hard not to think of it as a companion retired now, but once part of the illusion. Historians still argue how much control Elizabeth herself had over every detail of this daily transformation. Some suggest she delegated it all, allowing her wardrobe mistresses and personal attendants to manage the process entirely. Others believe she was deeply involved, choosing styles, adjusting pins, giving precise instructions. But regardless of the extent of her control, the outcome was always the same: consistency. Her image had to match the myth. And so her natural hair disappeared, not in a dramatic moment, but gradually over years. It became something she no longer relied on, no longer trusted, like a childhood toy once loved, but eventually tucked away, replaced by something sturdier, more reliable, less alive. You step back now as the Queen rises, her wig fully in place, the curls shimmering softly in the morning light. She does not glance toward a mirror. She does not check herself. She already knows the illusion holds. And for those who will see her today, for the foreign ambassadors, the anxious nobles, the hopeful poets, what they see will not be an aging woman. They will see the eternal monarch, the painted mask, the perfumed hair, the Queen who never fades. You feel the weight of it standing there, the cost of that kind of perfection, the hours spent in silence, the layers built upon layers, the transformation repeated every day without fail. It's beautiful, and it's exhausting, and still there is more. Because while her face is fixed and her hair unchanging, there are things even wigs cannot hide. Needs that every human must answer to, even queens. And where we go next, beneath velvet skirts and gold-threaded gowns, is a reality more intimate, and perhaps more surprising than anything we've seen before. Even queens must answer nature's call. It's the part of royal life that no tapestry can cover, no powdered wig can distract from. As graceful and godlike as Elizabeth may have appeared at court, She, like every other human being, had to navigate the deeply unglamorous realities of the body. But unlike most, she had to do it with dignity fully intact, or at the very least with the illusion of it. You follow her movements now as she steps with deliberate grace toward a tall, upholstered chair set slightly apart from the rest of the room. At first glance, it looks like a modest throne, a high-back red velvet seat, golden legs. But if you were to lift the cushion, you'd find a chamber pot tucked discreetly beneath the frame. This is no ordinary seat. This is her close stool, the Tudor answer to the modern toilet. And it is anything but ordinary. The close stool was an essential piece of court furniture, and for Elizabeth it was both functional and ceremonial. Made of carved wood, padded with embroidered fabric, and fitted with a ceramic or pewter chamber pot beneath the lid. It allowed her to relieve herself in relative privacy, though never truly alone. Attending to this most private of royal needs was a position of extreme trust and importance. It was the job of the groom of the stool, and he was no humble servant. He was a gentleman hand-picked from the nobility, and he held a place of unprecedented access and influence. Historians confirm that the groom of the stool was one of the most coveted positions in Elizabeth's court, not because of the task itself, though he did indeed handle the Queen's chamber pot, but because of the proximity it offered. In a world where access meant power being present at the most private moments, gave this man opportunities for intimate conversation, quiet persuasion, and loyal service. Some groom of the stool appointments went on to wield significant political influence, trusted not only with the Queen's hygiene, but also with secrets and state matters. You might imagine the Queen shrinking from such exposure, but surprisingly, Elizabeth was known to be pragmatic about her bodily functions within the strict bounds of decorum. She understood the necessity of the role, and she valued discretion above all. The chamber pot was cleaned frequently, often perfumed with crushed rosemary or lavender, and emptied through a series of carefully choreographed movements. The waste would be carried under cover of darkness through narrow service corridors, to be dumped far from the royal chambers, preferably into cesspits well outside the palace walls. And here's where the contrast deepens, because the Queen's personal arrangements, though discreet, were the best-case scenario for hygiene in Tudor England. Beyond her chamber in the bustling halls and servant quarters, chamber pots were often shared, poorly maintained, and rarely emptied with urgency. Palaces like Whitehall and Richmond might seem grand, but beneath their gilded ceilings lurked the overwhelming stench of humanity. Plumbing as we know it simply did not exist. In fact, Elizabeth's own palaces were known for their pungent atmosphere. Accounts from visitors described the royal residences as sweet in appearance, but with air that was anything but. The smell of waste lingered especially during summer months, when heat amplified everything. Rushes, bundles of dried grasses and herbs were scattered across the stone floors to soak up spills and odors. These rushes were perfumed with oils and flowers, but they were not changed regularly. Beneath them accumulated layers of filth food, scraps, soot-fallen hair, and worse. The elegant hallways of power, it turned out, were just as susceptible to decay as any alley in London. And yet Elizabeth managed to float above it all. Her solution movement. She rarely stayed in one palace for long. The royal progress, once a political and symbolic tradition, became in part a hygiene strategy. By constantly rotating her court through a network of country houses and manor estates, she avoided the worst buildup of waste. When one residence began to smell or overflow, the court would simply pack up and move on. A fresh estate, a new beginning, and slightly cleaner air. It's easy to see this as a sign of privilege, and of course it was. But it was also necessity. Without drainage systems, staying too long in one place could become a genuine health hazard. By keeping on the move, Elizabeth minimized the risk of disease and discomfort. She may not have bathed frequently, but she understood how to avoid filth. You turn now toward the ceremonial stool again. It's been freshly dressed with a clean cloth. The chamber pot has been removed and replaced without a sound. The groom of the stool, ever discreet, has vanished as quickly as he appeared. The queen sits back, gloves smoothed over her lap, expression unchanged. No one speaks of what just occurred. No one ever does. And here's a tidbit you may not have heard: the groom of the stool sometimes carried a perfumed pomander on his own belt, matching the queen's to keep the air pleasant while performing his duties. It's believed that he also kept detailed records, not of the queen's movements, but of what was served at meals, how her appetite fared, and whether anything seemed off. These observations could inform royal physicians and help anticipate illness. In essence, the royal toilet became a barometer for the queen's health, and in a way the health of the realm. You begin to see the strange contradiction in all this. A monarch presented as near divine, who nevertheless had to coordinate every bodily function with near military precision. A woman wrapped in lace and pearls, who had to trust another human being to clean her most vulnerable moments. And all of it conducted with the same calm poise she brought to diplomacy and war. Historians still debate how Elizabeth herself viewed the groom of the stool. Some claim she found the arrangement humiliating and distanced herself from the person in the role. Others argue that she considered it an extension of her inner circle, a bond forged not through flattery but necessity. Perhaps it was both. Perhaps she simply accepted it as one of many prices she paid for her image. And what an image it was! Every part of Elizabeth's public persona, from her voice to her scent, to the silken folds of her gowns, was curated to evoke majesty. And yet every day she had to step into a simple, necessary routine just like anyone else. Except for her, it came with embroidery protocol and an audience. You sit quietly now, watching the queen rise and adjust the folds of her gown. There's no sign of discomfort, no break in expression. The moment is folded neatly back into the day like it never happened. She will move on to her council chamber. She will hear petitions. She will sign orders. She will laugh when she chooses to and not before. But for you, something has shifted. You've seen behind the curtain just a little farther than most. You've witnessed the grace with which necessity is handled. And while it may not be pretty, it is in its own way remarkable. Because to carry such burdens, to dress even the most human needs in ceremony and dignity, that is its own form of power. And so the queen walks on through a palace that smells faintly of lavender and iron and candle smoke. A place that, despite its grandeur, cannot escape the realities beneath. You trail behind her quietly as the scent of her gloves lingers in the air. The illusion holds, but no scent, no ritual, no royal title could fully silence the truth of Tudor palaces. They stank. You notice it as you follow behind the queen down the corridor. The fragrance of her rose-scented gloves still lingers faintly in your nostrils, but it is quickly met by something less pleasant. Something deeper, older, heavier. It clings to the tapestries and lingers beneath the rushes. It seeps up from beneath the flagstones and wins its way around even the finest carvings. It is the smell of unwashed stone, of hundreds of bodies, of fire smoke, chamber pots, and waste. This is not a scent you can escape, and neither could she. No matter how carefully she curated her personal world, how often she changed her linen, or powdered her face, or doused her gloves in oils, I still lived in buildings designed more for display than for sanitation. Her palaces, for all their beauty, had no running water, no drainage systems, and no sealed walls. And despite the velvet and gold leaf, the royal court often carried a smell more suited to a marketplace in midsummer than to a sanctuary of power. Even the grandest palaces like Hampton Court, Richmond, or Whitehall suffered the same fate. Waste was deposited into cesspits dug just beneath or beside the buildings. These pits would fill slowly over time, releasing an odor that built up layer by layer. In the absence of modern plumbing, human waste was hauled away in heavy buckets by night soil men workers who crept through the palace grounds under cover of darkness, carrying pails of waste down staircases and through side doors, hoping to avoid attention and offense. Their work was necessary but never celebrated. In truth, it was barely acknowledged. And so the stench was ever present. Some days it was mild. Other days, when the wind shifted or the heat grew unbearable, it overwhelmed. What did the court do to combat it? They masked it just as Elizabeth masked herself. Herbs like rosemary, lavender, sweet marjoram, and mint were burned in censers or crushed beneath footfalls. Floors were scattered with rushes meant to absorb odors and filth alike. These rushes were perfumed with floral oils or strewn with dried petals to give the illusion of freshness, but they were rarely changed. Often they lay for weeks, even months, and beneath them collected not just smells, but stories, spilled wine-stray crumbs, the shed hairs of courtiers and dogs, the invisible remains of old sickness. Even the air itself was treated as suspect. Bad air, known then as miasma, was believed to carry disease. To breathe, it was to risk contamination. So the court fought smell as if it were contagion. They burned incense, carried pomanders, and opened windows when they dared. And yet illness still came. Plague still spread. The scent still lingered. One particularly vivid detail: when guests came to court, they often brought their own scents. A noblewoman might wear a small sachet of dried herbs sewn into her corset. Men might carry handkerchiefs dipped in vinegar. It was understood that courtly life, for all its splendor, had a cost, and that cost was olfactory endurance. Elizabeth herself was acutely aware of this. She ordered her personal chambers cleaned more frequently than other parts of the palace, and she often traveled not just for diplomacy, but for cleanliness. The royal progress, those famed journeys she made across the countryside, were not just political theater. They were a form of sanitation management. By vacating a palace, she gave the servants time to clean the cesspits air. The tapestries burned the rushes and freshened the air. In her absence, the building could heal. Historians still debate the extent to which these efforts were effective. Some believe they made a modest difference. Others argue that they were mostly symbolic rituals of resistance against a world that simply could not be scrubbed clean. But no one disputes that Elizabeth understood the importance of perception. Even if she couldn't stop the smell, she could appear untouched by it. You follow her now as she makes her way toward a receiving room. A brazier burns in the corner, releasing a sweet blend of sandalwood and dried rose petals. The scent is strong enough to mask the worst of the odors, but only just. She glides through it like it doesn't exist. You, on the other hand, can't help but flinch as the smell of damp stone and old ash creeps beneath the perfume. She doesn't let it touch her. She never does. And here's a tidbit that's equal parts fascinating and unsettling. Many of the Queen's garments were designed to help her rise above the filth, literally. Her farthingales, those wide-hooped skirts that spread her dress outward in a perfect bell shape, weren't just for fashion. They also helped keep the fabric of her gowns from dragging along the filthy floors. Combined with the high-heeled shoes and multiple underlayers, they created a physical buffer between her body and the dirt below. Some historians even suggest that the sound of her movement, the swish of skirts, the tap of heels, became part of her presence. A signal, a rhythm, a warning perhaps that something larger than life was entering the room. And indeed, when she arrived, people noticed. They bowed, they curtsied, they held their breath, sometimes literally. And yet, despite the smells, the sweat, and the sheer discomfort of it all, they wanted to be near her. Because to be near Elizabeth was to be near power. And power, however it might smell, was irresistible. You pause now, standing near a tall window. Outside, the air smells of wood smoke and wet grass. You take a deep breath, grateful for the fresh air. Inside, the chamber is quieter now. The Queen has moved on, but her scent lingers, a ghost of rosewater and clove, trailing behind her like a ribbon. And you realize something, all of it. The powders, the wigs, the linens, the rushes, the brazier, the pomanders, the progress journeys. They weren't just tools of hygiene. They were instruments of control. In a world where so much could not be cleaned, she cleaned what she could. She managed the narrative. She performed elegance. And in doing so, she made herself untouchable. Historians still question whether Elizabeth truly believed her own illusion. Did she think herself beyond the stink of the palace? Or did she simply learn how to ignore it better than anyone else? We may never know. But we do know this: for more than 40 years, she maintained the balance, the scent, the mask, the distance. And as you turn away from the window, back into the candlelit room, you can almost imagine her again. Not as a goddess, not as a symbol, but as a woman walking daily through a palace she could never quite cleanse, yet always made beautiful. Because even when the air was thick with the reminders of reality, Elizabeth found a way to float above it all. The illusion holds. Even now, even after all the powders and perfumes, the chamber pots, and the painted silence, you still haven't truly seen her. Not fully. Because there's one part of the illusion more fragile than all the rest. One final veil between the queen and the world. Her face. Not the one she wears to court, but the one that remains hidden beneath layers of ritual, secrecy, and time. It's not just that the face is painted. It's that it's untouchable. Literally. By the final years of her reign, Queen Elizabeth I was no longer seen in natural light. Her portraits were not rendered from real life, but replicated from earlier templates, composite ideals rather than truthful reflections. The painters were instructed not to record the effects of age fatigue or illness. They were to preserve the image, not the woman. A few brave observers recorded the truth anyway, in letters and journals meant for private eyes. They described a face so heavily coated in ceruse white lead that it had begun to crack to flake to irritate the skin it once concealed. Some whispered of open sores near the jawline of lesions that had to be covered with delicate patches of silk shaped like stars or moons. And yet she never abandoned the paint. To remove it would have been to reveal more than just blemishes. It would have meant surrendering the myth she had spent a lifetime crafting. A queen who did not age, who did not suffer, who could rule alone without husband heir or apology. That queen could not afford to be seen as merely human. And so she doubled down on the artifice year after year, layer after layer, until the mask itself became more real than the skin beneath it. Historians still argue over just how deteriorated her appearance became in those final years. Some believe the worst accounts are exaggerated, born from the pens of foreign ambassadors with motives of their own. Others argue that Elizabeth had long since crossed the threshold where the mask was no longer optional. It was essential. But regardless of where the truth lies, the pattern is clear: she protected her image with the same ferocity that she once protected England from the Spanish Armada. Even in private, she refused to face her reflection. Mirrors were removed from her chambers. The light was kept low. Her attendants were trained to be discreet, to apply fresh powder the moment a crack appeared, to replace a silk patch before it began to curl. Some say she had a chambermaid whose sole task was to dust her shoulders with fine powder when no one else was watching. And when the rare accident occurred, when the mask cracked in front of others, the queen did not rage. She withdrew, silently, and returned only when the illusion had been rebuilt. It was more than just a cosmetic routine. It was theater, the ritual of preserving not beauty, but authority. And even as her body failed her, her grip on that authority never wavered. She continued to attend council meetings, to oversee court ceremonies, to receive ambassadors, but always from behind the mask, always from behind the veil of scent silk and powdered calm. You think of all the energy it must have taken, not just physical effort, but emotional endurance, to never be seen fully, to live surrounded by people yet known by none, to carry a nation's expectations in the very skin you could no longer show. You stand once more in the dim candlelight of her bedchamber. The air smells of myrrh and old rose. The mirror is gone. The powder box is closed. The wig stand sits empty. And yet her presence is still here in the folds of the curtain, in the careful way the fire has been tended, in the quiet absence of any sign of age. It's tempting in moments like this to wonder what she saw when she was truly alone, what she whispered to herself in the dark, what she thought when her hands, wrinkled and dry, touched the silk of a glove meant to disguise them. But those answers are beyond us. The Queen kept them like so much else tucked behind the mask. Still, there's something undeniable in the stillness, something soft, even perhaps something sad. Not tragic, but tender. A woman who gave her face to history and asked for nothing back. And now the light fades just slightly. The shadows grow longer in the corners of the room. Her scent, clove, rose, and a hint of amber, still lingers in the folds of the chair. The Queen has moved on. Her day continues. Her image endures. But you remain just for a moment longer in this room where the most powerful woman in England became not immortal, but invisible. The illusion holds. And yet, not every woman cloaked herself in paint and powder. Not every court shared this same obsession with fragrance and fabrication. Some walked through their rituals with very different beliefs about cleanliness, about beauty, about power. As the candle burns low in Elizabeth's chamber, your gaze drifts outward beyond the walls of Tudor England, to another palace, another dynasty, another world entirely. The air shifts, the scent of rosewater fades, and in its place comes something sharper, richer ambergris and orange blossom cardamom and musk. You've left the cold stone corridors of Tudor England behind. Now you're stepping through the mirrored halls of Versailles, where the chandeliers shimmer with light, and the floors gleam under brocade slippers. Everything glitters. Everything gleams. And yet beneath the lace, the powdered wigs, and the perfume, some things haven't changed at all. This is the France of Louis XIV, the Sun King, where appearance was everything, and fragrance reigned supreme. Versailles, for all its opulence, was a palace built on contradiction. Every corner overflowed with luxury, yet water remained an enemy. The rooms dazzled with gold and marble. But behind the silken screens lay the same old smells. Because for all its glory, Versailles too had no plumbing. You wander now through the grand gallery where courtiers whisper secrets and peacocks roam the gardens outside. Everything is display layered, composed almost theatrical. Beauty is not casual here. It is a daily ritual, but once again it is a ritual performed without water. Historians agree bathing at Versailles was rare, not because it was inaccessible, but because it was distrusted. The prevailing medical belief still echoed Tudor thinking that immersing the body could open the pores and allow disease to enter. And so instead of water, they used scent. Buckets of it, spritzes, sachets, pomanders, wigs powdered with violet root, gloves soaked in neroli, skin washed not with soap, but with vinegared linen and scented spirits. A curious tidbit: courtiers at Versailles were expected to carry perfumed handkerchiefs at all times, not only for their own use, but to offer to others as a polite gesture in a moment of olfactory distress. Rooms were crowded. Air circulated poorly. And so everyone learned to politely avert their noses when needed. You step into one of the smaller salons now, where a noblewoman sits before a mirror. Yes, here they are not shy of mirrors, while her maid dusts her shoulders with rice powder, scented with iris. She hasn't bathed in weeks. She won't. But her skin glows under the powder. Her hair, stiff with pomade and flour, rises like a swan's neck from her shoulders. And yet under the layers the reality lingers. The court of Louis XIV was so intensely perfumed that even the gardens were designed to enhance the illusion. The king ordered walkways to be filled with orange trees in movable planters, so the scent could follow him from room to room. The famous Hall of Mirrors might have sparkled with sunlight, but the hallways behind it were choked with human waste, carried out nightly by overwhelmed servants who couldn't keep up with the court's size, because just like at Elizabeth's court, the grandeur was a veneer. There were chamber pots hidden behind tapestries, hidden corridors where waste was poured into troughs, and only the most prestigious rooms were cleaned regularly. If you weren't a favorite, you'd better bring your own perfume. And yet no one seemed to question it. Not publicly, not loudly. Because at Versailles, like in Tudor England, power was fragrance. To smell sweet was to signify status, and to smell foul was unthinkable. So they applied layer upon layer until the air itself felt heavy with roses and rot. You pause at the threshold of the royal bedchamber. Louis XIV's own toilette, the ceremony of his morning dressing, was a public event. Attendants, nobles, and petitioners watched as the king was washed, powdered, and dressed for the day. But the washing, it wasn't with water. It was with scented cloths dabbed along the brow, behind the ears, along the wrists. It was theater once again. A ritual of being seen to be clean. Historians still argue about just how foul the court may have been beneath the rose-petal facade. Some letters from foreign visitors described the court as elegant, but overpowering. Others noted that Versailles smelled like a garden in the morning, and a stable by evening. The truth likely falls somewhere between myth and reality. But no one denies the obsession with perfume. It was currency. It was armor. You step into a small antechamber now. A woman is adjusting her panniers' wide hoops beneath her gown, designed to display wealth and keep the fabric from brushing the floor. But they serve another function too. They keep the body elevated above the grime that builds on unwashed stone. Beneath her gown, the rushes have long gone stale. Her shoes are high, her gloves fragrant, her face serene. But you can see in the corner of her eye the same tired resignation you saw in Elizabeth's. She is composed, but always aware. And here's one more tidbit. There were perfume specialists, parfumeurs du roi, whose entire careers revolved around crafting new scents for the nobility. They created bespoke blends, adjusted them seasonally, and were expected to present new olfactory moods, just as a painter might present new themes. Your scent was part of your identity. Change it too often, and people might begin to question your standing. It wasn't just hygiene. It was politics, and perhaps that's the thread you're beginning to notice. Whether in England or France, Japan or Greece, beauty and cleanliness were never truly about health. They were about power. To rise above the filth, literally or metaphorically, was to assert dominance over nature, over decay, over time. And so you walk once more through the scented halls of Versailles, your footsteps muffled by silken slippers and dried petals crushed beneath the rushes. The air is thick with lily and musk. Somewhere someone laughs too loudly. A dog barks. A servant coughs behind a door that should have been shut. And yet the illusion holds, for now. But not every place relied so heavily on perfume. In another part of the world, far from powdered wigs and chamber pots, beauty was pursued in quieter, more natural ways. Let's leave the golden light of Versailles behind and slip into something stiller, simpler, cleaner. A new ritual awaits us, one that begins with rice water and silence. You leave behind the gilded echo of Versailles and enter another world entirely, where the perfume is subtler, the light more filtered, and the expectations quieter, but no less exacting. This is Edo Japan. The air hums with restraint. Here beauty is a matter of harmony, not spectacle. And as you step softly along a polished wooden corridor, lit with paper lanterns, the scent in the air is neither floral nor musky. It's rice, camellia oil, clean linen, and fresh tatami. Your host for this journey is a geisha, not the painted caricature often misunderstood in the West, but a woman of cultivated artistry, precision, and ritual. And part of her daily preparation, as you'll soon see, is one of the most disciplined hygiene routines of any elite woman in her time. You watch from a quiet corner of the dressing room as she kneels beside a lacquered basin filled with cooled rice water. It is cloudy, delicate, and slightly fragrant, not because anything has been added, but because the starch left behind from rinsed rice is considered nourishing, gentle on the skin, kind to the senses. With practiced care, she dips a silk cloth into the basin and begins to pat her face, her neck, her arms. No scrubbing, no harshness. Every movement is slow, deliberate. The idea is not just to clean, but to calm. This wasn't unique to geishas. Throughout Edo era, Japan, 1603 to 1868, bathing culture was deeply integrated into everyday life. Unlike in Elizabethan England or Versailles, where water was feared in Japan, it was embraced. Bathhouses sento were common and open to most social classes. The wealthy, of course, had private wooden tubs in attendance. But even for women of refinement, the emphasis was less on masking and more on purification. And unlike the heavily powdered women of Europe, Edo beauty was far more understated. Skin was to be smooth, luminous, lightly dusted with rice powder. Teeth were darkened with ohaguro, a practice of staining the teeth black with iron filings and vinegar to signal maturity, fidelity, and class. To Western eyes, it may seem strange, but within this culture, it was an aesthetic ideal tied to deep symbolic value. A quirky tidbit for you ohaguro wasn't just fashionable, it was hygienic. The iron solution used to stain the teeth actually helped prevent decay by forming a protective coating. So while Elizabeth I Fern's sugar-soaked smile crumbled away in secrecy, her Japanese contemporaries were chemically preserving theirs, albeit in an inky, unexpected shade. You sit now beside the low vanity where your host begins to oil her hair with camellia. The rich, clear oil is drawn carefully through her long black strands with a wooden comb. No towering wigs here, no powdered beehives. Just her own hair dressed and styled with the same reverence as the tea ceremony. The scent is light, earthy, slightly floral, and lingers just at the edge of perception. Hair in this world is a canvas, not to be hidden but honored. It's dressed according to occasion, age, and even marital status. Elaborate styles like shimada, the iconic bun-shaped chignon, could take hours to create, and were often supported with wax or thread. But they were always made from the wearer's real hair, cleaned, oiled, and tended with great care. In fact, geisha often slept on special wooden pillows to avoid ruining their hairstyles overnight. And while beauty was exacting, it was also deeply personal. Rather than being dictated by royal decree or court fashion, much of Japanese beauty culture in the Edo period emphasized subtlety, seasonality, and self-control. For instance, makeup colors would shift with the calendar warmer in spring, cooler in autumn. And women would often scent their hair, not their bodies, as an elegant whisper of their presence. Historians continue to debate the deeper meanings of Edo hygiene rituals. Were they acts of aesthetic devotion, or were they part of a larger social script meant to instill discipline and reinforce order? Perhaps both. But one thing is certain. Edo-era hygiene practices placed Japan centuries ahead of many European counterparts in terms of daily cleanliness and health awareness. You step back as your host finishes dressing. Her kimono is layered with grace, the silk whispering with every motion. A small sachet of crushed kusunoki camphor wood is tucked discreetly into her obi sash, not to overpower, but to gently repel insects and keep the fabric fresh. Her entire ensemble is quiet, coordinated, balanced. There's no excess, no garish scent, no illusion of eternal youth. Her beauty does not shout, it breathes. And you notice something else. There are no chamber pots hidden behind curtains, no powdered patches concealing sores, no wigs clamped tight with sugar and egg whites. Instead, there's steam from a nearby bath, a soft cloth set to dry, and a sense that her beauty isn't at war with her body. In fact, it seems the two have made peace. You leave her now bowing slightly and return to the corridor. The paper walls tremble gently with the breeze. You pass a group of young girls learning shamisen their fingers, calloused from practice, their hair tied neatly back. No scent trails them. No makeup smears their faces. They are not yet women of ceremony, but already they know beauty begins with intention. And as you slip once more into the present away from Edo Japan, you carry with you the memory of a world where hygiene was a kind of meditation. A ritual not just of appearance, but of respect toward oneself, one's community, and the natural world. It's a different kind of glamour. Not lesser, not louder, just stiller. But now let's journey further back, far beyond kimonos and combs, to a sun-bleached courtyard where olive trees sway and marble shimmers in the heat. There another woman waits, not perfumed, not powdered, but painted in sunlight and oil. Welcome to ancient Greece, where the pursuit of beauty took a most sculptural turn. You step quietly from the serene shadows of Edo Japan and into the sun-drenched courtyards of ancient Athens, where marble gleams like still water, and the air smells faintly of thyme dust and warm olive wood. The atmosphere is different here, brighter, starker, but no less bound by ritual. In this world of philosophers and playwrights, where men debated the soul in open-air agoras, and the very idea of democracy took hesitant root, your presence as a woman, especially a noble one, is shaped by silence, modesty, and the art of appearances. The kind of beauty expected of you is not theatrical or powdered, but controlled, symbolic, and utterly unblemished by sunlight or labor. Here you are a Kyria, a respectable wife or daughter of status kept mostly indoors, your skin shielded from the sun's darkening touch. Pale skin in Athens is not just considered elegant, it's a visible sign that you do not toil. Sun-bronzed skin belongs to slaves and sellers to women, who must labor outdoors. You are not one of them, or at least you must never appear to be. And so your beauty routines begin before sunrise, under the flickering oil lamp in your chamber, guided not by a mirror but by instinct and expectation. You begin by applying a soft, chalky powder made from white lead or crushed marble. Yes, even here, long before the Tudors, people embraced the idea of painting their skin in the name of purity. The lead may sting a little, may leave a faint sour smell if you're sensitive to it, but it blurs freckles and hides the small blemishes that sometimes bloom from eating too much barley or honeyed fig. You dab it gently with a cloth, never touching your face directly with your hands. Hands can transfer oils, and oils are suspect unless they're the right kind of coarse. Because unlike Elizabeth's thick paints and poisons in Greece, your skin is softened with olive oil, not just for cooking, not just for lighting lamps, but as an everyday elixir of beauty. A fine, fragrant oil is your closest thing to a cleanser. Each morning after dusting your face, you rub olive oil along your arms and neck, letting it soak in slowly. Later, when it comes time to wash, you'll scrape it off along with sweat, dead skin, and whatever else has accumulated with a bronze instrument called a strigil. There's no soap, no lather, just oil, metal, and patience. It's a practice borrowed from the gymnasia, where male athletes strip oil themselves and scrape clean before wrestling or racing. And though women do not train in public like men, the same philosophy of purity through oil and scraping trickles into your private world. There is no bath in your home, not in the way you might imagine it. Perhaps a basin, perhaps a small ceramic tub for washing your feet or rinsing your undergarments, but full immersion. That's a rare luxury sometimes arranged at a public bathhouse, if your husband approves and the day permits. When it does happen, it feels more like a celebration than a routine. You may bring a slave to help carry perfumed herbs to boil in the water like rosemary or iris root. But most days your cleanliness is built not on water, but on careful layering powder oil, scraping, and scent. Ah, yes, the scent. You aren't doused in perfume the way an Egyptian noblewoman might be, but neither are you unscented. A bit of rose oil behind the ears, a dab of myrrh on the wrists, and maybe a touch of anise on your clothing, especially if you expect guests. Some women even chew cinnamon bark or mint leaves, just in case conversation arises, though respectable women in Athens are not expected to speak much outside their homes. Your appearance is your voice, and your hygiene is part of that carefully curated expression. As for your hair, thick, dark, and heavy, it's oiled too. Not washed often, but combed daily and arranged in braided coils pinned with ivory or bone. You might use a mixture of olive oil and beeswax to tame flyaways, or even eggshell and ash paste, if your scalp itches. If you're particularly wealthy, a servant may prepare your hair while you sit still for an hour, listening to the morning birds and the bustle in the courtyard below. And what about your clothing? Your hammation or peplos is linen or wool, depending on the season, and always clean. Clean in the sense that it's brushed, shaken, and aired out. Washing is laborious and done sparingly, perhaps once every 2 weeks, sometimes less. A slave may beat it gently on stones near the cistern, using clay and ash as makeshift soap, but you never see that part. What you know is that your tunic smells faintly of sun and time, and that's what matters. But all this effort isn't really for others, it's for you. Or rather, for the role you've been trained to play since girlhood. You're not allowed to vote or speak in the assembly or own property independently unless widowed, but you are expected to represent your household through your decorum. That includes looking clean in the Greek sense, controlled, composed, quiet. To smell faintly of flowers and appear pale and serene is to say, without speaking, I am well kept, modest, and virtuous. Historically, it's true, ancient Greek society, especially in Athens, tied a woman's physical presentation directly to her moral character. And so even hygiene, the oil, the scrapers, the chalky powders was a moral exercise as much as a physical one. To neglect it would be to shame not just yourself, but your family. Cleanliness in its stylized symbolic form was a pillar of feminine virtue, and yet it wasn't always so heavy. Some moments are lighter. A girl might giggle while balancing her hairpins or spill oil down her chiton, and be scolded playfully. Mothers passed down recipes for perfumes. Old women brewed lavender sachets to hang in wardrobes. Cleanliness had its gentler side, its comforts and connections, its small joys in a life otherwise quiet and confined. Now for a curious tidbit, one that even historians raise eyebrows at. There are references, albeit sparse and debated, that some Athenian women used pigeon droppings mixed with vinegar to lighten their complexions. A technique perhaps borrowed from Egypt or Persia, and one that certainly smells more alarming than it looks. Historians still argue whether this was truly practiced widely or just exaggerated by later Roman writers with a flair for shock. But even so, it's a glimpse into how far ideals of beauty and purity might push the boundaries of comfort, even in a society famed for logic and balance. Interestingly, unlike in later Europe, menstruation in ancient Greece was not as heavily shrouded in shame, though it still carried notions of ritual impurity. A woman during her cycle was often excused from certain household religious duties, and some texts hint that she might avoid communal gatherings. But hygiene solutions were surprisingly practical: woolen pads rinsed and reused, herbs brewed into teas to ease discomfort. There is no record of fragrant gloves or perfumed handkerchiefs here, just basic functional care as private as the rooms you dwell in. And as for public perception, well, it's subtle. A woman was not paraded in court, not flaunted at banquets, not seen as an object of visual pleasure the way courtesans were. Your beauty was quiet, meant to be hidden, appreciated only by your family, and perhaps occasionally by the gods themselves. Aphrodite may reign in sculpture, but in life, the ideal woman is a shadow, modest, pale, fragrant, and silent. Still, there is power in this quiet, not grand power, not the kind Queen Elizabeth wielded with portraits and proclamations, but the power of subtle influence, a clean home, a calm presence, a face serene and unreadable even when you are thinking of other things. And yes, a body gently scraped with oil and bronze until it gleams like marble beneath your robe. The marble. Ah, that's what you return to. The marble of your courtyard bench. The marble of the statues in your family shrine. Cold and perfect and impossibly smooth. That's the ideal. That's the standard. Not a living body that sweats and ages, but one that pretends, at least for a while, to be carved from stone. And so, as the cicadas hum outside and the sun climbs above the tiled roof, you rise from your stool, adjust your peplos, and move into the day. You smell faintly of olive and rose. Your skin is cool with chalk, your hair pinned just right. You say nothing. You nod politely. And just like that, the world sees you as it should, a reflection of order, beauty, and invisible effort. But of course you know the truth, that beneath the marble pale surface you are human. You itch. You age. You wonder. And perhaps if you are lucky, you laugh quietly when no one is listening. That too is part of the ritual. And as the shadows lengthen over Athens, we leave you there beneath the painted lintels and perfumed fabrics, a woman defined not by power or politics, but by the slow, exacting art of appearing untouched by time. From here, our journey drifts eastward again to silk screens and lotus blossoms, where nature's palette reigned over rouge, and where beauty was a kind of poetry rather than performance. You find yourself standing at the threshold of an opulent courtyard surrounded by carved sandalwood screens and drifting petals of white magnolia. The air is soft with the fragrance of osmanthus and faint incense, and you're not entirely sure if the mist around you is morning dew or the perfume of centuries past. The place is Chang'an, the heart of the Tang Dynasty, one of the most cosmopolitan and artistically vibrant courts in all of Chinese history. And at the center of this elegant realm is a woman, not a queen, but a consort, beautiful, poised, and preparing for her day, with a ritual that's more poetry than routine. Her attendants move quietly around her like petals caught in a gentle breeze. There is no lead-white face paint here, no poisoned powders or artificial wigs. Her beauty is not built upon denial of the body, but rather a celebration of it. Her hair, long and ink-dark, is being combed with a jade-handled brush. The oil used pressed from camellia blossoms rich and nourishing. It carries a subtle floral warmth, both soothing and efficient, a far cry from the stiff wigs of Tudor queens or the lye-scrubbed scalps of Victorian ladies. You sit at a quiet distance, watching as her face is prepared, not hidden beneath a mask, but enhanced with flower-based pigments. Crushed safflower lends a blush to her cheeks, a soft red tint, not unlike the color of blooming lotuses after rain. Ground pearls, carefully stored in silk pouches, are dusted lightly onto her skin, not for a ghostly pallor, but for a luminous glow. It's more about vitality than status, though, of course, status is never far behind. Even her robes whisper status dyed with saffron, embroidered with songbirds in golden thread. Everything she wears smells faintly of sandalwood and dried chrysanthemum, a living sachet of her own presence. It might surprise you to know that these beauty practices weren't simply for the emperor's eyes. In Tang China, a woman's adornment was a form of cultivated elegance, a personal expression, and a ritual of self-respect. The art of zhangrong, literally adornment, and decoration, was as respected as calligraphy or poetry. A well-decorated face could be a symbol of refined taste, not just allure. Some noble women even composed poetry while applying makeup, their faces becoming mirrors for inner refinement. One particularly unique Tang practice involved the use of small decorative forehead patches, known as hua dian. These tiny shapes, often gold leaf or colored paper, were glued above the eyebrows. Butterflies, flowers, even abstract patterns, they were ephemeral, yet powerful, a statement of style like a modern-day accessory. Some women also dusted their brows with fine charcoal, or even shaved them completely to redraw a thinner curved version, a delicate arch that signified grace. And if you're wondering whether Tang beauty was painful, the answer is sometimes, but not gratuitously so. The pursuit of elegance here was not to punish the body, but to refine it. Waxing and exfoliation weren't foreign concepts, though often done gently with rice flour or mung bean paste. Baths were common, especially in upper-class homes or palace compounds, which had access to heated water. Herbal infusions, including mugwort and ginseng, were used to soothe the skin and refresh the spirit. Hygiene and beauty were deeply entwined, though perhaps not in the antiseptic sense we might expect today. They were rituals of restoration, not sterilization. Now here's a tidbit that might surprise you. During the height of the Tang dynasty, women were encouraged to be physically active. Ladies of the court often played polo yes polo in long flowing robes on horseback, chasing balls across palace fields while spectators cheered. There's even an 8th century mural in the Mogao caves depicting aristocratic women with wind-tousled hair and flushed cheeks mid-game. Beauty in this case included motion confidence and the joyful flush of activity. This was a world where feminine elegance and spirited presence weren't mutually exclusive. Historians still argue whether this openness toward women's freedom and bodily expression was typical across all Tang society, or if it was a fleeting luxury, enjoyed only by elite urban women. After all, life outside the walls of Chang'an was far less perfumed. But there's no denying that for a time, the Tang court was a rare confluence of artistic richness and feminine agency. Bathing, too, held a place of honor in this society. Unlike the fear of water that lingered in Tudor England, the Tang embraced regular washing, especially among nobles. Public bathhouses were common in Chang'an, and the idea of cleansing the body extended beyond physical hygiene. It was tied to moral and spiritual clarity. Before rituals or festivals, it was customary to bathe and change garments, not unlike ceremonial purification in other cultures. Lavender, frankincense, and Chinese cedar might scent the waters. Some sources mention emperors commissioning entire bathing gardens, where pavilions were set beside heated pools. To bathe was to be reborn, silently, gracefully. Yet despite the Tang's relative sophistication, not all beauty habits were entirely harmless. The red pigments used for lip and cheek tint often included cinnabar, a mercury-based compound. Applied regularly, it could lead to health issues over time, though probably not at the levels used in small quantities. Still, the parallels with Elizabeth's mercury-laced cosmetics are eerie. Two different empires, two different definitions of beauty, but both dancing around the same dangerous metals in pursuit of perfection. The Tang were also obsessed with fragrance, not unlike Queen Elizabeth I, but for entirely different reasons. While the Virgin Queen used perfume to mask decay and reinforce illusion, Tang women wore fragrance like a poem, each scent selected for its season mood or poetic metaphor. Sachets filled with clove cassia or musk were tied to sleeves. Hair oils carried hints of lotus rose or plum blossom. It was said that a truly elegant lady could walk through a room and leave behind not her footsteps, but a memory of spring. One Tang poem describes a noblewoman's sleeve scent, lingering on a chair after she's gone, as if time itself had paused to inhale. That's the sort of delicate, ephemeral beauty celebrated in this world. Not permanence, but presence. Not covering up, but showing up refined, serene, softly radiant. Even clothing played into the sensory aesthetic. Robes were chosen not only for color or embroidery, but for movement. Silk, of course, was prized. Not just any silk, but the softest dyed with natural pigments like gardenia yellow or wisteria blue. Garments were layered to float as the wearer walked, sleeves trailing like willow branches. There's even a famous anecdote about a Tang empress refusing to wear a certain silk because it made too much noise when she moved, disrupting the quiet harmony she cultivated in her presence. And what about the famed painted brows? Tang women were known to experiment with wild eyebrow shapes, arched like moths, curved like willows, sometimes even square. There's a record of 10 name styles from fluttering sparrow to distant mountain. It wasn't just trendiness, it was symbolic. A well-drawn brow spoke of character, fortune, and mood. Women who lost their eyebrows due to illness or age didn't hide them. they reimagined them. There was creativity in impermanence, artistry, and adaptation. We should note that these beauty rituals were not isolated to noblewomen alone. Merchants' wives, educated courtesans, and entertainers also cultivated appearance, especially in the urban sprawl of Chang'an. Though class certainly dictated access to rare ingredients or silks, the aspiration for refinement ran deep across social strata. In some districts, young girls learned cosmetics, alongside poetry and music. Beauty was part of a holistic education, not a vanity project, but a cultural literacy. There is even historical evidence of a kind of early beauty influencer system. Popular styles were sometimes spread through painted scrolls or silk illustrations, showing fashionable women in their best attire and makeup. These artworks were pinned in tea houses and sold in marketplaces, allowing women across classes to follow imperial trends. If that doesn't feel strikingly modern, what does, as you sit now beside this Tang consort, watching the final touches to her appearance, perhaps a few flower petals pressed into her hair or a delicate dusting of sandalwood to the back of her neck, you sense something familiar and yet far away. She is not hiding herself. She is adorning herself. Her beauty is not about creating an untouchable mask, but about stepping into the day with grace. And for a fleeting moment, the world she inhabits feels remarkably kind. The air shifts again, your view of Chang'an slowly softens into the fog of memory. As you leave the scented silk and moonlit pavilions behind you, carry with you a feeling that's hard to name. Was it peace? Or simply the quiet pleasure of being present with someone who saw beauty as ritual, not performance? And from that warm and reflective world, you find yourself gently moving forward again, this time toward marble columns and the sound of flowing water. You step into a space that breathes warmth from the walls. The marble is misted the air heavy with steam, and you're surrounded by a hush that feels sacred, not religious perhaps, but ritualistic. It's the hammam, the heart of Ottoman cleansing culture, and today you are no mere guest. You are one of the women of the palace, a concubine or court lady summoned into a marble sanctuary for the weekly rites of purification. The outside world politics ceremony, silk can wait. In here, time slows, skin softens, and secrets are steeped into vapor. Unlike the stiff, perfumed rituals of Queen Elizabeth's England, here in the Ottoman Empire, water is not feared, it is revered. While Elizabeth powdered herself into myth, you surrender to the heat, letting it melt away your outer shell. The hammam isn't a place to perform beauty. It's where beauty is revealed, scrubbed, rinsed, and reborn from within. The hammam or public bathhouse is not merely a hygiene facility. It's an institution, a social hub, and a spiritual cleansing ground. These domed buildings scatter across Istanbul like pearls, each topped with small circular glass skylights called gözlük, letting in shafts of sunlight that pierce through rising plumes of steam. You shuffle barefoot across warm marble slabs, guided by the soft slaps of water being poured from brass bowls, and the gentle murmurs of women speaking in hushed tones. You begin in the sokluk, the cool room where you remove your outer garments and wrap your body in a pestamol, a thin cotton cloth, striped with soft colors. You keep your sandals on wooden nalin with mother-of-pearl inlays because the marble is hot and slick. The humidity already clings to your skin, curling your hair and loosening the grime of daily life. But this is only the prelude. Soon you pass into the ılıklık, the warm room where your body acclimates. The atmosphere is thick and aromatic soap. Rose eucalyptus and musk waft around you in invisible clouds. Finally you reach the hararet, the hot room, the core of the hammam soul. There's a central raised platform, göbek taşı or belly stone, where women lie like offerings, letting the heat sink deep into their joints, their thoughts, their very breath. You stretch out on the stone's warm surface, and within minutes your body begins to release what it's held onto all week. Heat seeps into your muscles, opens your pores, and softens your defenses. Here you don't paint yourself into power, like Elizabeth did. Instead, you surrender, and in doing so, you're transformed. Anata, a female bath attendant, trained in the art of exfoliation, approaches with practiced serenity. She carries a rough mitt made of goat hair and a copper bowl of sudsy olive oil soap. Without words, she begins the ritual of kisi, scrubbing your arms in long strokes, your back, your thighs, every inch until dead skin rolls off like paper ash. It's not unpleasant, just thorough. She rinses you with warm water, poured slowly from a brass ewer, and for a moment it feels as though the entire weight of your week, maybe your life, is being washed away. Unlike in Tudor England, where bodily maintenance was invisible, cautious and often rooted in fear, Ottoman cleansing was a public affair of pride. Cleanliness was not merely practical, it was spiritual, influenced by Islamic principles of purification. Tahara, the hammam, served as a bridge between the physical and the sacred. Ritual washing was required before prayer, but here it was elevated into something more, a luxury, a lifestyle, a bonding rite. Historians still debate whether these elaborate hammam customs were entirely religious in origin, or whether they were enhanced by the empire's love of beauty and sensuality. What is certain, however, is that Ottoman women from the palace to the marketplace took these rituals seriously, not as obligations, but as pleasures. Some would visit the hammam twice a week, sometimes more. The baths weren't just for the body, they were where friendships were formed. Gossip exchanged, and even marriage arrangements whispered between bowls of rosewater and scrubbing mitts. One of the most fascinating tidbits from the time comes from the hammam parties. Yes, bath parties. Wealthy brides-to-be were often paraded in the baths, where their beauty was displayed discreetly within the bounds of decency, and songs, food, and henna rituals took place. Musicians played, sweets were served, and the heat was punctuated by laughter echoing under domed ceilings. Imagine a bridal shower crossed with a spa day, held in a warm mist that made everyone glow. Your skin now polished, you're gently led to a marble basin where water is poured again and again until the air is no longer thick with steam but soft with contentment. A final rinse, and then you're wrapped in dry cloths, your hair gently toweled and combed with oil. No perfumes of mercury or lead. No poisonous paints, only essential oils. Natural soaps and henna to bring out the warmth in your nails. Hair, too, was a ritual. Camellia oil was a favorite, but sesame rose and almond oils also made appearances. Women would apply oil to their hair and braid it tightly before steaming in the hammam, so the heat could help the oil sink deep into the strands. Afterward, hair was dried slowly, sometimes perfumed with clove or cardamom, and rebraided or styled under soft scarves. It's notable how the Ottoman approach contrasts with the harsh regimens of European royalty, where Queen Elizabeth I coated her face in layers of lead-based makeup that caused lesions and scarring. Ottoman women emphasized nourishment. Beauty was something coaxed out, not carved in. While Elizabeth avoided bathing out of fear of illness or image disruption, Ottoman women immersed themselves freely, trusting the water and their knowledge of herbs. And perhaps that is the soft lesson of the hammam, that surrender can be strength. Here in the marble warmth, you're not hiding from your body, nor trying to control it. You are listening to it, honoring it. You begin to understand why these women centuries ago considered bathing a kind of power. When you step out into the cool room again, your skin tingles. You feel cleaner than you've ever been, not just on the surface, but in your mind. You wrap yourself in fresh linen and sip a warm drink, maybe sherbet, maybe rose tea, and the experience lingers like scent on your skin. You've emerged not painted, not disguised, but restored. You glance around the hammam one last time, and something soft settles into your chest. A sense of timelessness, of having been part of something ancient and still alive. And as you walk into the afternoon sun, You realize something Elizabeth never allowed herself to feel, that the body tended with care and allowed to breathe can carry its own quiet grace. And from this fragrant, glistening marble world, we turn gently now toward a more corseted chapter of beauty, where air grows tighter and breathing becomes a performance in itself. The dress they've chosen for you is breathtaking and almost entirely breathless. You stand still, arms slightly raised, as two maids begin the delicate, ruthless work of dressing you. First comes the chemise, soft against the skin, though already you feel the quiet pressure of performance. Then the corset. It's not just for shape, it's for status restraint, and the Victorian silhouette that was never meant to be comfortable. Tight lacing is in vogue this season, as it was in the last. You brace yourself as they pull the cords. With every tug, your ribs feel just a bit more like decoration. Breathing becomes shallower, not because you're panicked, but because your body literally can't expand as it used to. You glance at the mirror lips, still parted in a soft smile, and now fully encased in the body of a fashionable woman. Victorian glamour, it seems, is not about what you put on, so much as what you take away. Air, flexibility, privacy. Corsets of the mid-19th century were designed to draw in the waist, but more than that, to reshape the torso entirely. The ideal was the hourglass figure, sloped shoulders, minuscule waist and wide hips. Medical journals of the time quietly warned of corset liver, a condition observed in autopsies, where the internal organs had been noticeably displaced due to chronic tight lacing. Yet women persisted, not always by choice, sometimes out of duty, sometimes from competition, and sometimes simply because no alternative was imaginable. After all, if one was to be seen, one had to be admired. A curious historical tidbit: some women reportedly fainted during meals, not just from nerves, but because their stomachs had no room left to expand. Afternoon tea might be accompanied by a genteel collapse fan, fluttering dramatically as salts were fetched. Fainting couches, once thought to be an aesthetic flourish, served a very practical function. Of course, you've barely begun. After the corset comes the cage crinoline, an enormous steel frame petticoat that swings around your hips like a birdcage. Introduced in the 1850s, crinolines allowed skirts to balloon outward, impressively without the need for layer upon layer of heavy petticoats, but maneuvering with dignity. That's another challenge entirely. You quickly learn to turn sideways through doors, to sit with choreography, to be mindful of open flames. In fact, one of the darker realities of this fashion innovation was its danger. There are recorded incidents of crinolines catching fire from hearths or candles. The steel frames, instead of offering protection, could trap the wearer inside a burning hoop. Historians still debate how common these events were, but it is clear that more than a few fashion-forward women perished not from illness or childbirth, but from the very fabric of elegance. Makeup by Victorian standards was a trickier affair. Respectable women were expected to appear naturally beautiful, meaning, of course, that their effort had to be invisible. You dab your cheeks with a bit of rice powder, a touch of carmine tint if you're daring. Too much, and you risk being mistaken for an actress, or worse, a courtesan. You remember reading that Queen Victoria herself disapproved of cosmetics, believing them improper for ladies. The line between adornment and indecency was razor thin. So instead, the beauty rituals retreated into subtler territory. Lemon juice to bleach freckles, cold cream to soften the skin, and arsenic wafers to pale the complexion. Yes, arsenic. Marketed as Dr. Campbell's safe arsenic complexion wafers, these pills promised to clear the skin and bestow an ethereal whiteness. What they delivered, of course, was toxicity. Women reported headaches, nausea, and in some cases permanent damage. But glowing skin came at a cost, and Victorian women were taught that suffering, when elegant, was almost a virtue. You step carefully into the drawing room, now gloved fingers folded just so. A guest has arrived, a gentleman. You offer him tea with a bow of the head and the practiced rhythm of polite phrases. Your corset doesn't allow much room for laughter. and certainly no room for a full cup of tea. Still you sip, and you smile, because the performance is what matters. What's fascinating is that Victorian beauty ideals, despite their restrictions, were pursued even in private. Diaries from young women detail their early experiences with corsetry, their fears of never achieving the ideal silhouette. Mothers passed down techniques, remedies and cautionary tales in the same breath. It was cultural inheritance dressed up as etiquette. You might be told to avoid frowning not only because it made you look sour, but because repeated expressions could cause premature wrinkles. Fragrance, too, was part of this sensory performance. Lavender sachets in drawers, rose water behind the ears, musk or amber resin tucked into handkerchiefs, in a time when bathing was still infrequent scent, became a kind of olfactory illusion one meant to signal refinement and cleanliness without revealing the truth beneath the lace and silk. And beneath it all a constant undercurrent, that the more invisible your labor, the more admired your appearance. This is why your dressing table contains no real mirrors, only tiny locket-sized ones meant for checking the tilt of your bonnet or the state of your gloves. To look too long to scrutinize your reflection was to court vanity. Better to cultivate modesty and maintain the illusion. Interestingly, one odd little detail from the period stands out: the invention of ear pomade. Victorians believed the ears being close to the hairline shouldn't look dry or flaky. So specialized creams were sold to make them gleam ever so subtly. It sounds absurd now, but at the time it was simply another step in the endless ladder of refinement. Your shoes, of course, are satin, delicate, pretty, utterly useless in the rain, and your ankles must never be seen unless the hem lifts by accident, a scandalous flutter that could spark an entire parlor's worth of gossip. Because even as Victorian women were physically constrained, they were also observed constantly. Beauty was performance. Performance was surveillance, and everyone played their role. You pause by the window, now pretending to admire the garden, but really you're catching your breath. The corset, though expertly laced, presses against your ribs more urgently than before. A gentle reminder that glamour demands compliance. You wonder if the other women at the luncheon feel the same, if they too are counting the hours until the dressing gown returns, and they can finally breathe again. Of course this isn't universal. By the 1890s, whispers of change begin. The Rational Dress Society forms in London, calling for clothing that doesn't deform the body. A few bold women abandon corsets altogether, replacing them with looser garments, inspired by artistic movements and classical antiquity. But these are outliers. For most, the standard remains intact. The ideal Victorian woman doesn't sweat, doesn't fidget, and certainly doesn't speak of discomfort. And yet, she is always adjusting, always adapting. The pins in her hair pull slightly, the shoes pinch, the bodice creaks when she bends too far. Her world is wrapped in satin but lined with quiet ache. By the time you retreat to your chamber that evening, the glamour has wilted slightly. You undo the corset slowly, grateful for the sudden flood of oxygen. You wipe the powder from your face with cold cream, revealing a faint flush and a hint of freckles you'd kept hidden all day. You are still beautiful, but it's a different beauty now. Softer, unwrapped. And for a moment, as the candle flickers low, you wonder, was all this effort really about admiration from others? Or about proving something to yourself, that you could endure, that you could transform? You lie down, letting the silk of your nightdress settle gently over your skin. Somewhere in the house, a music box plays faintly, winding its final notes. The corset hangs from a hook. The crinoline rests in a corner like a collapsed birdcage. And you no longer a performance breathe deeply for the first time all day. But the story of beauty of pain in service of elegance is not unique to this parlor, nor to this century. And in the final section, we'll take one last step back to look at this strange shared journey across time. Because beneath every layer of powder and perfume has always been the same longing to be seen as more than flesh, to be remembered as something divine. You linger now in a quiet moment, near the end, resting your eyes on the many faces history painted, some powdered white, others glowing in lamplight or shimmering behind layers of silk and amber oils. But whether it was the golden curls of a Habsburg duchess or the sandalwood-kissed cheeks of a Tang consort, beauty, especially royal beauty, rarely came free. And as you breathe in the last threads of rosewater and camphor, you begin to understand just how heavy a crown could feel when it sat upon someone trying to remain flawless. Across the centuries and across cultures, women born into nobility were taught not just to rule or marry, but to dazzle, to maintain, to endure. Their lives were parades of appearance. And unlike a pageant that ended with applause, theirs began at dawn and didn't truly stop, even when the curtain fell on life itself. Whether you were standing behind Queen Elizabeth I as she refused to wash away the mask she'd built, or watching a Victorian lady tighten her corset so breathlessly that even laughter became a luxury, there was one common thread: perfection was exhausting and often dangerous. Take, for instance, the lead-based powders Elizabeth I and her father wore not once or twice for ceremony, but every single day for decades. The damage was not merely cosmetic. Over time, her skin blistered, peeled, and was left covered in raw lesions. That was not metaphorical, it was physical pain in pursuit of myth. Her body became so sensitive that even touch could tear her skin, yet the ritual remained. Historians still debate whether Elizabeth truly understood the poisonous nature of her cosmetics. But most agree on this: she couldn't afford to stop. Not politically, not symbolically, and certainly not emotionally. If her mask cracked, the illusion cracked, and with it the realm's faith in its eternal queen. It wasn't just her. In 18th century France, noblewomen wore patches of mouse fur to cover pockmarks left by smallpox and lead. Some even glued them in crescent shapes on their cheeks, not because they wanted to, but because they had to make disfigurement fashionable. In Ming China, women sometimes used mercury-based cosmetics for that signature porcelain glow. And in ancient Rome, noblewomen risked their vision using belladonna eye drops to dilate their pupils, because wide eyes meant innocence, and innocence meant power, or at least compliance. Quirky, yes, but also quietly horrifying. Even hygiene, once thought to be a personal or spiritual practice, became twisted by aesthetic pressure. The Tang consort might have soaked in rosewood water and brushed her hair with phoenix feather combs, but it was never only for herself. Like Elizabeth, her preparation was political. She represented dynasty and legacy, and in court, to appear fatigued or unkempt was to risk demotion or worse, erasure. One might assume the pressure eased over time, but no, it simply changed shape. By the Victorian era, cleanliness and beauty were redefined again as moral obligations. A woman's appearance was no longer just her virtue, it was her entire worth. The corset, once a tool of posture, became an instrument of discipline. The more you wore it, the more your body complied. Waists shrank, breathing shallowed. And yet, like their Tudor predecessors, Victorian noblewomen were praised for fainting gracefully, delicacy being the polite code for systemic oxygen deprivation. That's the great irony, isn't it? What the world called elegance was so often just quiet suffering in a gown. And all of this beauty, this painful, gilded, perfumed pursuit of perfection, wasn't born from vanity alone. It was survival. In royal courts, a single blemish could cost you a throne. A wrinkle could end a marriage negotiation. A bad scent could mean being passed over for succession, for security, for safety. Because beauty, as we now see, wasn't shallow. It was power. Fragile, dangerous, high-maintenance power. There's a reason, Elizabeth, I was never painted in natural light during her later years. Her portraits were not portraits at all, but templates. Recycled illusions from her youth, repainted, reimagined, retouched. The Gloriana we remember is not the woman who aged, who limped, who trembled. It's the woman who refused to let the world see her without her armor of powder and perfume. But beneath that, she was very human, just like you, just like all the others. And while the tools have changed today's serums and injections replacing white lead and mouse fur, the impulse remains. The belief that if we can just appear flawless, we'll be safe. That there's power in the mirror's reflection. That maybe if we look the part, the world will love us a little more gently. Yet what we forget, what even queens forgot, is that the mirror reflects, but it does not protect. It can only copy what's already there. And if beneath the gold and the lace there's only pressure, fear and exhaustion, no amount of jasmine oil or rouge will make the weight of expectation lighter. So here at the end of our quiet walk through history's most carefully powdered rooms, you pause not to judge but to understand, to appreciate the women who stood so still for so long, just to be admired, who endured the sting of vinegar rinses, the burns of chemical creams, the whispers of court gossip, and the silence of their own discomfort, all for the sake of a beauty that was never quite theirs to keep. And in understanding that maybe you give yourself a little more softness tonight, maybe you let the mirror fog, maybe just for now you lie back imperfect and unpowdered, and realize that the most peaceful kind of beauty is the one that asks nothing from you in return. The chambers are quiet now. The rose water has faded from your skin, and the rustle of silk has long since settled. You've wandered through palaces of painted women, through halls that whispered of jasmine and illness, through mirrors that showed not who they were, but who they had to be. And somewhere between the powder and the pain, you found the truth that beauty in history was a kind of armor, heavy, fragile, necessary. You think of Elizabeth refusing the bath, the mirror, the truth of time. You think of a geisha dipping her brush into crushed flower petals, a Roman noblewoman scraping oil from her arms, a Victorian lady lying breathless in her corset, all of them tethered to an ideal, unreachable, exhausting, and demanded by the world around them. But you are not in that world, not tonight. You lie beneath soft covers instead of perfumed layers. Your skin is clean, not from vinegar, but from water. Your breath comes easily, your body unbound, your face unpainted. And in this simple stillness, you reclaim what those women were so often denied rest: ease, the gentle permission to exist without performance. So as the candlelight dims and the story closes, you let go of the history clinging to corset strings and lead powder. You let it drift away like old perfume. And with one last breath, you remember, you don't need to be perfect to be beautiful. You just need to be. Sweet dreams.